And welcome. It's Mary Ellen McGonagle here with your Thursday afternoon MEM Edge show on this holiday shortened week. As usual, this is the show where we bring you where the action is in the broader markets. And despite being a shortened week, there is quite a bit of activity taking place beneath the surface. The markets did, of course, close at another new high. Some of those news items last week, we can talk about the tax cut and spending bill. It did pass the Senate. It is now at the House waiting for final approval. And there were certainly some indications within that bill that impacted certain areas as far as items being removed and added. We'll talk about that. Also, payrolls came in today and they increased more than expected, and that had an interesting impact on the markets. We will review that. And then there was a trade agreement with Vietnam, and that took place midweek. That was viewed as good news generally for that overall trade war fear. We'll talk about the impact there as well. And then export restrictions were lifted on electronic automation tools. Sounds obscure, but there were areas impacted by that ruling as well. Next week, pretty light on the economic calendar. We do have the FOMC meeting, and then those notes will be released on Wednesdays, usually very impactful. And let's go ahead and take a look at those markets and see where we closed for the week. And here we are, the S&P 500 daily price chart. And as noted, we did close the week at another new high. Certainly quite bullish activity going into the third quarter. We do have an RSI and MACD both in bullish territory. Now, that RSI is overbought. Quite simply, it's above 70. And we can go back to prior bullish periods and see that the S&P 500 can retain an overbought condition and continue to expand. But certainly at some point, we will be expecting at the very least a period of consolidation. For now, markets are firmly in an uptrend. Let's go ahead and take a look at those 11 sectors beneath the surface of the S&P 500. For those not familiar, this is a 2-month daily price chart view sorted by that relative strength indicator in descending order. So let's take a look. The S&P 500, given its advance last week, is up here at the forefront. Now, this may not be of note, but in fact, it is because we are seeing broadening out within the S&P 500, and hence it is moving to the forefront. Those dominant areas are still also up here at the forefront, i.e. technology, industrials, and financials. These are economically sensitive areas that are faring well in light of reduced inflation fears. Now, as we move through, this is one of the newer areas to this forefront, and that is basic materials. And this is going to be all about aluminum and steel stocks, silver, a lot of these needed metals, certainly in AI and other areas. And the primary reason for their big boost this week was that trade deal with Vietnam. Again, it settled those trade war fears, which in turn is good for these metals. Now, as we move through, we'll take a look at some of these weaker areas, and sure enough, we have staples, utilities, healthcare, and REITs. And generally, these are your more defensive areas of the markets. They were not down for the week, but they did not participate in the S&P's 1.7% rally, so hence they are down here in this weaker quartile. We did see an interesting move into energy. We can take a quick look here, XLE. Now, we did have this advance with the tensions in the Middle East because the price of oil spiked. Once a truce was announced, we did see energy pull back. However, it did advance into the close for this week, all about increased oil demand and potentially reduced supply. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at financials. XLF hitting a new high in price. I talked about this last Friday, the fact that this was among those economically sensitive areas that is advancing. Other factors at play here relating to stablecoin, Bitcoin, and other dynamics that we will get to later today. Now, from here, we're going to advance beyond these sectors, drill down even further into the markets. Again, really critical, certainly from my work, to understand and get a very good feel for where that strength is in the markets. The purpose is, of course, so that you can participate in that. For instance, with semiconductors and my MEM Edge twice weekly report, we were able to get into this group very early. It was one of the first industry groups that was advancing rather strongly, and it did show up as doing just that. And then we added a number of names back in here that have gone on to great heights. So there's certainly one of the solid reasons to stay on top of that strength. Bank stocks were languishing for quite some time, but yet again, when they began to advance, it became evident that you needed to pay attention and participate in that strength. So let's go ahead and move through, take a look at some of the areas that are weaker, and it is in a good way. This is the volatility index, and it closed at about 16.5. So we definitely are heading in the right direction with that fear index heading lower. Also, gold, which had been a safe haven, certainly during the Mideast tensions and trade war fears, is losing a bit of its luster here, although we did have a little bit of a late week rally in those gold stocks. Newer to the forefront, it's not quite up here yet, but biotechs had been languishing for quite some time. But let's take a look. Here we are with IBB, the NASDAQ Biotech ETF, sharp advance and a nice 1-month base breakout. Now, a lot of this has to do with a risk on appetite now for investors, but even more importantly is the fact that small cap stocks have come into favor. We'll take a look at IWM, and a lot of these biotechs are smaller in nature. So if you combine the move into small caps, in addition to a risk on appetite, hence the move. So here we are with that Russell 2000 index. You can see that we have now more decisively moved back above this 200-day simple moving average. Nice high volume characteristics. And today I will be focusing on the small cap space, sharing with you areas of interest and then also notable stocks. But at the end of the day, we are very, very good to see that broadening out to include small cap stocks. Also up here at the forefront, KRE, we talked about financials, bank stocks on the move higher. This is another area that small caps are fairly heavily weighted. I believe about 17% of the Russell 2000 small cap index is banking stocks. And we'll take a look at a couple of those areas and then also beginning to move to the forefront. Let's take a look at XHB. This is the S&P 500 Home Builders ETF. Sharpest advance took place on Tuesday. We can see this big advance into a nice base breakout and all about interest rates. So as we move through, we'll take a look at the yield on that 10-year, which is one of the benchmarks for the overall interest rate environment, but keeping an eye on those home builders as the group begins to come into favor. A lot of the underlying home building stocks are not due to report positive earnings until the beginning of next year. But of course, the markets do tend to look out 6 months. So we could, in fact, see a move before the numbers become evident. Here we are with XRT. This was another top performer this week. This is the retail ETF for the S&P 500. Again, that sharp advance as we saw interest rates drop. This is another economically sensitive area. So let's go ahead and take a look at the yield on that 10-year. And I can highlight this decrease that we saw in the yield down to 4.2%. Very, very encouraging. Now, today in particular, we did see an uptick. This has everything to do with that strong jobs data pushing rates higher. Now, interest rates are going to fare better in a period, certainly when inflation is declining and other characteristics. But when we get into a strong employment number, then you will see a rise. So keeping an eye on that, because you can see how pivotal these interest rates can be as far as other areas in the markets. Another area that had a big boost today is IGV. Software stocks were languishing for most of this week, but today we did see a nice sharp advance. I'll share with you a couple of the bigger plays and also share with you why they were on the move higher, but a nice boost there going into the close for the week. And then IHI is the medical devices ETF. Now, relative to that healthcare overall ETF, we can see that it is sitting up here quite nicely, also experiencing that Tuesday advance and then a bit of back and fill beyond that. So from here, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these big movers today. So this is that front page interface on stockcharts.com. Going to draw your attention to the market movers. Quite simply, can be sorted by those names that are the most active. You will see this list is a bit more static because a lot of these are mega cap names that are going to, by way of nature, find more activity in them. But here we are with today's price within the S&P 500, those names that were up the most. So from here, we can go ahead and ask for a candle glance view. And I really can't stress this enough, but it takes just a minute to get this particular view of the stocks that are up the most. And then oftentimes, if you do get into the habit, pay attention to it on a regular basis, you will see themes emerge. And certainly today, two themes did emerge. One of them that came into play earlier in the week and is seeing a continuation rally. But first up, let's take a look at some of these software names. Here we are with DDOG, DDOG. I did bring this to light last Friday as a name that was in the throes of reversing its downtrend by way of closing back above that 200-day. Now, today's advance, it was up 15%, super high volume, all about being included in the S&P 500. So as we move through, let's take a look at some of these other software stocks that had big moves today. Cadence Design, CDNS, gapping up into a base breakout, decent volume on a shortened holiday. And we can see that our MACD getting right up into positive territory with a bullish RSI. The other name, SNPS, also had a base breakout prior to today's gap up, equally nice high volume, and then that MACD crossover. And quite simply, these two stocks were up because the export tariffs to electronic related software and other areas was lifted. So it immediately impacted these two stocks. But let's take a look at another theme that is emerging. Did want to share with you First Solar and then ENPH. So first up, we'll take a look at First Solar, FSLR. You can see it's a very volatile area of the markets, and it is going to be very much driven by rules relating to tax benefits and other areas that are going to impact the revenue for these companies. Now, with renewables on that big tax and spending bill, the Senate did drop the excise tax for these alternative energy stocks. So hence we can see the move back into, for instance, FSLR. We can take a quick look here at on phase ENPH, not very compelling looking, but if you look at technology, the alt energy space was the top performing by, I believe it was up about 8% this week. So there certainly is movement in that area. I'll share with you a small cap name to keep an eye on. And then as we move through, let's go ahead and take a look at NOW. This is another name that I did talk about, I believe, last Friday. And you can see that we've had this back and fill formation here, but today we did break out above this 2-month base. You can see that black line up through the red with a nice MACD crossover. So again, this list, in addition to giving you hints as to money flows, areas, if you see more than one stock in an industry group that is faring well, it is telling you that money flows are going in that direction, but also you can uncover names that are in the beginning stages of their potential advance. Let's take a look at other areas. I talked about small caps being on the move higher. And from here, I will go ahead and share a couple of names in the alt energy space that are small cap, but of note, it is a volatile area, so you do want to tread somewhat lightly. This is JKS. It is an ADR, China-based solar company. You can see this gap up into a 3-month base breakout, super high volume, and then a continuation rally. RUN is another smaller cap solar or alt energy name, just entering into an uptrend back above that 200-day simple moving average, and then that MACD in positive territory. But again, of note, they do tend to be quite a bit more volatile, certainly than the M7 stocks, which I should mention, most of them underperformed and in fact were down for the week. So that's another indication when we see the S&P 500 up strongly. We talked about a rotation into newer areas. I'm going to pivot back to the S&P 500 equal weighted very quickly as we are on the topic of the fact that the equal weighted S&P 500, it actually had an exceptional week, up about 2.4% relative to the broader S&P, which has that heavier M7, Magnificent Seven name heavy weighting, and that was up 1.7%. So let's go ahead back and review some of these smaller cap names that could be of interest here. And we can move through some of the different industry groups. For instance, within the industrials, we talked about industrials being on the move higher, highly economically sensitive. And then, of course, we do have a number of construction companies involved in data centers and utilities. But when looking at smaller stocks, we can take a look at KMT, and this is a industrial name, industrial machinery stock, and you can see that it did break back above that 200-day simple moving average. We have bullish characteristics here as it attempts to advance. Now, it is a little bit overbought, but certainly of note. We can also take a look at semiconductors. We did look at that group earlier today, still very much in an uptrend, and I'll share with you an interesting smaller cap name. We've certainly seen NVIDIA and other large cap names fare quite well, but here we are with ACMR Research. This is the company on their earnings, pulling back very orderly and now back in a confirmed uptrend. XLB, we talked about those metals stocks. Let's take a look at a couple of small cap names in there. Century Aluminum, CENX. Not overly compelling, but it is back up above that 200-day simple moving average. Would like to see more volume to convince me that buyers really want to get in. So from here, we can take a look at Worthington Steel. Steel stocks on the move, back gap up above that 200-day simple moving average. Nice high volume characteristics. Now, let's take a look at a couple of other names that are going to be a little bit smaller. This is Amplitude, AMPL, another software company. You can see it's in the beginning stages of forming a handle formation that would allow this cup with handle to break out. So anywhere up around that 13.2 level would indicate a nice cup with handle base breakout. Confirmation would be that MACD crossover. Another smaller name that we can take a look at in software is LegalZoom. Some of you may be familiar. They do help you with legal issues for individuals, and we can see this gap up that took place in the beginning of May. Bit of languishing, but it does appear to be picking up here as we move through. Now, a lot of these stocks will have that appearance quite simply because small caps are only recently coming into favor. PRCH, and that is a tech company. They provide internet access to rural areas. And we can see that we had that base breakout last week and then a nice orderly continuation rally. It has been a winning stock in the past, so I would certainly put it on your watch list if you are on the lookout for smaller cap names. Let's go ahead and pivot over to consumer discretionaries. This is Wolverine Worldwide, WWW, and they provide footwear for heavy duty construction jobs, also hiking and so forth. And they did execute a base breakout on Wednesday, nice, decent volume, and then nice momentum there. We can also take a look at a name that is going to be a little more mid-cap, but mid-caps are on the move higher as well. This is Urban, URBN. Here's the gap up on their numbers, which came out above estimates. You can see that nice high volume characteristic. So when a stock gets into an overbought condition following a gap up, oftentimes you will see this period of consolidation as it digests this significant move. What you will want to keep an eye on is that RSI. As long as it stays in positive territory, you're in good standing. But what is compelling to me at this time is the fact that we are potentially being reignited here. If we get that black line up through the red, it will confirm a new uptrend. And then we can take a look at financials, another area that has been on the move higher. And I talked about a number of those bank stocks that are smaller in market cap. So let's see if we can get that ticker symbol right. This is going to be a Financial Corp, CCB, Coastal Financial Corp, and we can see this nice base breakout here in this group and then a potential continuation rally. I'm going to share with you how you can get into those small cap bank names and identify the stocks that are more technically sound. But before we do that, a couple of more of these small cap names that I think you need to be aware of, quite simply because they're in a group and an area that has been quite explosive, but because they are smaller cap, perhaps many of you may not have picked up on that. And that is the quantum computing stocks, QUBT. They're not all going to have numbers. They are very much still in the development stage, but the technology is very, very promising. And here we are with QUBT, and you can see that we are on the cusp of a potential 7-month base breakout. Those of you that are familiar, the longer your base before a breakout oftentimes will precede a much longer continuation. Now, from here, we can take a look at BMNR, and this is BitMine. Now, certainly it is exemplative of the fact that these Bitcoin stocks overall are volatile, but you can see this sharp advance, and I did not realize it was up 160% today. Well, what I wanted to do is share with you how when a name that is not widely followed really gets to begin moving, what you can do to guide your potential investment or not. This is going to be certainly for more nimble investors. Actually, let's go ahead back. We'll start with the 1 hour, 60-minute. Here's that gap up on the 30th. And when the stock does advance like this, what you will want to do is two things. Make sure that the stock stays above the 5 and 13-hour simple moving average as such. And then also make sure that that RSI remains in positive territory. Really no signs of deteriorating. On that 60-minute chart, you can see that actually it looks poised for further upside, if you can imagine, after 160% advance. But here we are on that 15-minute, and this, of course, is going to be for super near-term investors because you can see where you would have gotten shaken out at the end of the day here on July 1st. And then from there, had you re-entered, you could stay with the stock and it still looks quite constructive. One last name that is going to be certainly a little more volatile, but in a more bit of a more speculative space. This is CTOR. We talked about that move into biotech names, and this is a smaller cap oncology. Again, sharp, you're going to see larger advances in these small cap names. So for me, I am going to want to drill down into a shorter term view as a guide. So from here, let's go ahead and take a look at one last name circling back to the renewable space. And this is going to be unlike the alt energy names that we were looking at. It's going to be quite a bit orderly, and it is GEV and it's GE Vernova. And this is an alternative energy stock, not as vibrant as I would have expected given this week's news, but it is certainly in a nice uptrend, lot less volatile in that particular stock. From here, we're going to pivot over to the front page of stockcharts.com. I'll share with you an exercise, and you can do this for banks. Certainly, we talked about biotechs and so on that are coming into their own. So what you will want to do is go to the sector drill down. And then from here, you can sort this by intraday performance by 1 week. And then this is the scooter rating, Stockcharts technical rating. The higher the rating, the better. And we can see up here at the forefront, tech, industrials, internets, financials. So let's go ahead over to that financial group. We want to drill down further, as we did earlier with the broader markets, and look at where that strength last week was within the financial sector. So we can see asset managers up here at the forefront. And what I want to do is share with you a couple of names that are definitely on the move in that asset management space and talk about why. First up here is BlackRock, and you can see it's not super early in its advance, but one of the reasons is because they are one of the largest distributors of ETFs. So when we see markets hitting a new high, investors want to participate. Oftentimes, those ETFs are the quickest, cleanest way. State Street is another huge ETF provider, and we can see that sharp move. Let's go ahead and take a look at a weekly chart, and you can see we still have perhaps a little more upside price movement there. But let's go ahead back to the area that we were looking at as it relates to that sector drill down. We talked about banks, and what we can do from here is go ahead and pull up the overall group, and then it will share with you the names and their performances last week. And then also from here, let's go ahead and pull up that end of day move, and then you can sort it by market cap. And then what the from here, you can take a look at these names that are on the move higher. This Stockcharts technical rating, 99 is the highest. And a real sweet spot can be that 75 to 85 area as far as capturing names in the beginning stages of their move higher. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the grouping, because banks, there are an awful large number of them, but we do want to take a quick look at some of these smaller cap names, and that small cap does begin up here. From here, you can take a quick look. A lot of the foreign banks have already been on the move higher, so we're on the lookout for US-based names that are potentially just beginning their advance. And here we are with HBCP, Home Bank Corp, and you can see we had that breakout, so we are not particularly early. So we can go ahead and drill down a little bit further and look at names that are not quite as high on that Stockcharts technical rating. FVCB certainly would qualify. Now, for me, I'm not seeing a whole lot of volume, but really what I wanted to present to you is the ability to quickly get in front of names, not only in a particular industry group. You can sort it by market cap and then use that Stockcharts technical rating to get in front of names just as they are beginning to advance. And that's it for this week. Everyone have a fantastic holiday weekend. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button. Comments are always welcome. I'm very happy to reply. And as always, I'll see you here next Friday.